Now that Daddy's dead, pack your things and find yourself a new home. This house was never really yours anyway." The words hit me like a slap across the face, delivered with a smirk that made my stomach turn. I walked out of my house, carrying nothing but a small suitcase, tears streaming down my cheeks while my stepdaughter Sarah watched from the window, probably laughing. The next morning, I walked into the bank and discovered I owned 60% of everything my late husband had built. What happened next changed everything. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. The funeral was 25 years of marriage, and they couldn't even wait 24 hours before showing their true colors. I should have seen it coming when Sarah whispered to her husband during the service, pointing at me and mouthing, "Gold digger." "You heard what my wife said." Mark, Sarah's husband, stepped forward with his chest puffed out like some wannabe tough guy. "Time for you to go back to whatever trailer park you crawled out of." How absolutely charming. I'd helped raise this man's children, been paying their private school tuition from my personal account for 3 years, and this was my thank you. Clearly, gratitude runs in the family. "I'll give you 30 minutes to pack," Sarah announced, checking her phone like I was some kind of appointment she needed to squeeze in. "Then Mark's calling the police." The neighbors were probably having a field day with this drama. Mrs. Patterson from next door kept peeking through her curtains. I gave her a little wave. Might as well give her a good show for her entertainment dollar. "This is my father's house," Sarah continued, her voice getting louder with each word. "You were just the hired help who got lucky." Hired help. 25 years of marriage reduced to hired help. I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood, but managed to keep smiling. If only she knew what I knew. I packed my suitcase in silence while they watched me like vultures circling roadkill. Sarah even had the nerve to follow me around, making sure I didn't steal anything, as if I'd want their tacky decorations and discount furniture. "Don't even think about taking any of Mom's jewelry," she snapped when I walked past her mother's old jewelry box. I paused and looked at her with the sweetest smile I could manage. "Wouldn't dream of it, dear." The irony was absolutely delicious. If only she knew what Robert had really left me. As I walked out the front door, Mark called after me. "Don't bother coming back for anything else. We're changing the locks tonight." I turned around one last time and saw Sarah in the doorway, arms crossed, looking absolutely victorious. She actually had the audacity to smile and wave goodbye like she was seeing off a guest who'd overstayed their welcome. That night, I cried myself to sleep in a cheap motel room. But by morning, I had a plan. And unlike Sarah's brilliant life strategies, mine was actually going to work. The bank opened at 9 sharp. I was their first customer of the day, armed with my marriage certificate and identification. The manager, Mr. Davidson, had been handling our accounts for 15 years. His face went white when he accessed the estate records. "Mrs. Peterson," he said carefully, "your husband's attorney contacted us yesterday. The will reading is scheduled for next week, but I can share some preliminary information about accounts where you're listed as beneficiary." My heart was pounding as he pulled up the records. Time to see just how wrong Sarah had been about everything. "You're the primary beneficiary on several major accounts, and there's a private investment portfolio in your name that your husband funded over the years." I stared at the numbers on the screen. Robert had been setting money aside for me for decades, money Sarah knew nothing about. Apparently, the hired help was about to become very well compensated. "There's something else," Mr. Davidson continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Your husband added you as a signatory on the children's trust accounts last year. The records show some highly unusual activity." Oh, this was getting interesting. Mr. Davidson's hands were steady, but his voice carried concern as he spread the transaction records across his desk. "These trust accounts were meant to be untouched until the children reached 25, but there have been significant withdrawals over the past 18 months. I scanned the numbers, my blood running cold. Hundreds of thousands of dollars systematically transferred out of accounts meant for Robert's grandchildren. Well, Sarah had been busy. "Who authorized these withdrawals?" "Your stepdaughter, as the appointed trustee. The memo lines indicate educational expenses and emergency medical costs. But," he paused diplomatically. "But what, Mr. Davidson?" "But the amounts far exceed any reasonable educational or medical expenses for children that age." My mind was racing. Sarah had been stealing from her own nephew's trust funds. The woman who just threw me out for being a gold digger was literally a thief. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. "I need you to freeze these accounts immediately," I said quietly, "and prepare documentation for the will reading." "Of course, Mrs. Peterson." Might I also suggest you speak with your attorney about requesting a formal audit? Smart man. Please arrange that as well. I drove straight to Patricia Walsh's office. Robert's attorney for 30 years, Patricia had handled our wills, business documents, and estate planning. Her reaction to the trust fund situation was immediate and sharp. This is embezzlement, Margaret. Those accounts were specifically designated for the children's futures. Can Sarah claim the withdrawals were legitimate? Not without receipts and documentation, which I doubt she has. Patricia pulled out a thick folder. Robert came to see me 6 months before he died. He was concerned about Sarah's behavior and wanted to ensure you'd be protected. She handed me a sealed envelope. He asked me to give you this after the will reading, but given what you've discovered, I think you should read it now. Robert's handwriting was shakier than I remembered, but his words were clear. My dearest Margaret, if you're reading this, it means my fears about Sarah were justified. I've loved her all her life, but I can no longer ignore her sense of entitlement. The woman I married 30 years ago deserves better than the treatment you've endured. Everything I've built, I built thinking of you. Use it wisely, use it well, and don't let anyone make you feel guilty for accepting what you've earned through decades of love and loyalty. So my supposedly manipulative gold digging had earned me my late husband's entire fortune. What a scandal. Patricia, when is the will reading? Friday at 2 p.m. The entire family will be present. Perfect. That gives me 3 days to prepare my acceptance speech. That afternoon, I called the private school where Sarah's boys were enrolled. I'd been quietly supplementing their tuition for years through my personal account, something Sarah had never bothered to investigate. Mrs. Peterson, how lovely to hear from you, the headmaster greeted me warmly. I trust you're well, despite your recent loss. Thank you, Mr. Thompson. I'm calling about the Mitchell children's tuition situation. Of course. We were sorry to hear about the missed payment last month. Financial difficulties during times of grief are understandable. Missed payment. How interesting. Actually, I need to discuss changing the payment structure. I'll no longer be covering the supplemental costs. There was a pause. I see. Should I contact Mrs. Mitchell about the full tuition amount then? That would be her responsibility, yes. By 3 p.m. my phone was ringing. Sarah's voice was tight with panic. What did you do? The school just called about tuition. I stopped paying for something that was never my responsibility. Amazing how quickly the tune changes when money's involved. You've been paying their tuition? The portion you couldn't afford, yes. For 3 years. The silence was absolutely beautiful. I could practically hear her brain trying to process this information. Margaret, we need to talk. Do we? Because yesterday you seemed quite clear that I wasn't family. We were emotional. Dad just died, and you threw me out of my own home. I'm not feeling very charitable today. Please, can we meet somewhere? Just to talk? I considered this. Sarah was starting to panic, which meant she was finally realizing the scope of what she didn't know. Time to let her sweat a little more. The coffee shop on Main Street, tomorrow at 10 a.m. Thank you, I hung up. Let her spend the night wondering exactly how much trouble she was in. That evening, I sat in my motel room reviewing bank statements and Robert's personal papers. He'd been meticulous about documenting Sarah's behavior, dates, incidents, conversations. It painted a picture of a daughter who'd never learned to appreciate what she had, but it also showed a father who'd never stopped hoping she'd change. The will reading was going to be absolutely spectacular. Sarah was already at the coffee shop when I arrived, hunched over a cup that looked like it had gone cold hours ago. She looked terrible. Unwashed hair, rumpled clothes, dark circles under her eyes. Guilt and panic really don't do wonders for the complexion. Thank you for coming, she said without looking up. I sat down across from her and waited. Sometimes silence is the most powerful weapon in your arsenal. I've been thinking about what you said, about the tuition. And? She finally met my eyes. I didn't know you were helping with the payments. I thought the trust fund money was covering everything. The trust fund money you've been withdrawing illegally? Her face went pale. How did you know about that? Your father made me a signatory on those accounts. I can see every transaction, Sarah. I smiled sweetly. Turns out the hired help has access to all sorts of interesting information. She started crying then, not the angry tears from yesterday, but desperate, frightened sobs. Amazing how quickly crocodile tears appear when someone's caught red-handed. It wasn't supposed to go this far, she whispered. How far was it supposed to go? Mark's business was failing. We were behind on mortgage payments, the kids' school costs were piling up, and Dad was so sick he wasn't paying attention to the finances. So you decided to steal from your children's inheritance? I was going to pay it back. Once Mark's business recovered, or when the main inheritance came through, I pulled out my phone and showed her the bank statements Mr. Davidson had provided. Sarah, you've taken nearly $300,000 from those accounts over 18 months. The number hung in the air like a death sentence. Her face went from pale to green. That's not possible, she stammered. $5,000 here for educational expenses that went to your mortgage payment. $10,000 there for medical emergencies that funded your vacation to Hawaii. $20,000 for tutoring services that paid off Mark's credit cards. Each example hit her like a physical blow. I was almost starting to feel sorry for her. Almost. I was protecting the family. Dad's medical bills were astronomical. Your father's medical bills were covered by insurance. I have those records too. Really? Did she think I was born yesterday? She buried her face in her hands. Oh God, what have I done? You've stolen from your own children and destroyed your relationship with the one person who could have helped you. What do you mean? I leaned forward. Sarah, did you ever wonder why your father married me? Because you were young and pretty and available? I was 25 when I met your father. He was 38, recently widowed, with 2 grieving children who needed stability. I wasn't looking for a sugar daddy. I was working as a nurse, putting myself through graduate school. Her expression shifted slightly. Facts have a way of ruining perfectly good assumptions. Your father didn't need my money. He needed someone who could love his children as much as he did. Someone who would put family first, always. But you never had children of your own. By choice. Your father's family was my family. You and David were my children. Even when you made it abundantly clear I wasn't welcome. Fresh tears started flowing. At this rate, she'd dehydrate. For 25 years, I've watched you struggle and never asked for help. I've paid for school supplies, birthday parties, emergency car repairs, and medical bills. Always quietly, always without making you feel indebted. Why? Because that's what mothers do. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Sarah, the will reading is tomorrow. After that, everyone will know about the trust fund situation. Are you going to have me arrested? That depends on what happens in the next 24 hours. What do you want from me? I stood up and gathered my purse. I want you to be the daughter your father raised you to be, the woman he always believed you could become. I don't know how to do that anymore. Figure it out. You have until tomorrow at 2 p.m. As I walked toward the door, she called after me. Margaret? Yes? I'm sorry. About yesterday. About all of it. I'm so very sorry. I turned back to look at her. Really look at her. For the first time in years, I saw not the entitled, angry woman who'd thrown me out of my home, but the scared 16-year-old who'd lost her mother and didn't know how to let anyone else love her. I know you are. Now prove it. Because tomorrow, the real show was going to begin. The will reading took place in Patricia Walsh's conference room with the entire Peterson family present. Sarah sat between her brother David and her husband Mark, looking like she was facing a firing squad. Linda and Tom, Robert's siblings, flanked the table while I sat closest to Patricia. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a butter knife. This was going to be even more entertaining than I'd hoped. Before we begin, Patricia announced, I need to inform everyone that there's an ongoing investigation into irregularities with the children's trust accounts. Mrs. Peterson discovered unauthorized withdrawals and has requested a formal audit. Mark's face turned red. That's ridiculous. Sarah was the appointed trustee. Being a trustee doesn't authorize personal use of trust funds, Patricia replied calmly. Sarah had gone completely white. She'd had 24 hours to prepare for this moment, but clearly hadn't found the courage to confess to her family. Some people never learn. Let's proceed with the will reading, Patricia continued. Robert Peterson's last will and testament, dated 6 months before his death. The basic provisions were straightforward enough. I inherited the house, the beach property, and 60% of Peterson Construction. David received 20% of the business and a substantial cash bequest. Sarah received 15% of the business and her trust fund, what was left of it anyway. But then, Patricia read the personal letter Robert had included. To my beloved wife Margaret, she began, you have been the light of my life for 25 years. You loved my children when they couldn't love you back, supported my business when times were hard, and cared for me through sickness with grace and devotion. Everything I leave you, you have earned 10 times over. Mark was scowling like someone had forced him to eat lemons, but David and Linda were nodding appreciatively. To my daughter Sarah, Patricia continued, I love you deeply, but I cannot ignore your sense of entitlement or your treatment of my wife. Margaret has been more of a mother to you than you ever allowed her to be. I pray that someday you will see her worth and your own behavior clearly." Sarah's tears were flowing freely now. Good. Maybe reality was finally sinking in. "To my son David, you have always shown respect and kindness to both your family and your stepmother. Continue to be the man I raised you to be." After the formal reading, the family began to disperse. But Mark wasn't finished making a fool of himself. "This is insane," he exploded. "She gets everything while the real children get scraps." "Mark," David warned, "don't start." "Start what? Telling the truth? She manipulated a sick old man." I'd had enough of this particular performance. "Mark, would you like to explain to everyone how your wife spent her children's inheritance money?" The room went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop in the parking lot. "What are you talking about?" Linda asked. I pulled out the audit report that had arrived that morning. "Sarah has withdrawn nearly $300,000 from her children's trust funds over the past 18 months. The reaction was immediate and explosive. David stood up so fast his chair fell over. "Sarah, tell me this isn't true." Sarah couldn't speak. She just sat there crying while Mark sputtered denials like a broken sprinkler system. "The audit shows systematic withdrawals," I continued, thoroughly enjoying every second of this. "Money that was supposed to fund the boys' college education went to cover mortgage payments, credit card debt, and personal expenses." Tom was reading over my shoulder, his face darkening with each page. "Sarah, these boys are my grandnephews. How could you steal from them?" "It wasn't stealing," Mark shouted. "We're their parents. We have every right." "No," David's voice was ice cold. "You don't. Those accounts were specifically designated as untouchable until the children reached 25. Linda was staring at Sarah in horror. "How much is left?" I consulted the report with theatrical precision. "About $40,000 out of $350,000. The number hit the room like a nuclear bomb. I could practically see the radiation poisoning spreading across their faces. Sarah finally found her voice. "I was going to pay it back. Once Mark's business recovered, or after Dad." "After Dad what?" David demanded. "After he died and you inherited his money? Were you planning to steal from his estate too?" "It wasn't like that." But even as she protested, everyone could see the truth. Sarah had been counting on inheritance money to cover her thefts. Unfortunately for her, she'd severely miscalculated who would be inheriting what. "There's something else," I said quietly, "because why stop when you're having so much fun?" The business has been carrying significant debt for the past 2 years. Debt that Sarah, as financial manager, should have disclosed. Patricia nodded grimly. The company's accountant discovered irregularities there as well. Funds transferred to personal accounts, fake vendor payments, altered expense reports. Mark jumped up, swaying slightly. He'd clearly been drinking before the meeting. "You can't prove any of this." "Actually, we can." I handed him a copy of the criminal complaint I'd filed that morning. Embezzlement charges were filed this morning with the district attorney's office. Sarah let out a wail of despair. "Margaret, please, you said you'd give me 24 hours. I gave you 24 hours to confess to your family and take responsibility. Instead, you let your husband attack me and continued lying." David was looking at his sister like he'd never seen her before. "Sarah, how did it come to this?" "I don't know," she sobbed. "Everything just spiraled out of control, and I didn't know how to stop it." Linda stood up, her face etched with disappointment. "I think we've heard enough. Margaret, I owe you an apology. We all do." "No apology necessary. You couldn't have known." As the family filed out, Sarah caught my arm. "Please," she whispered, "isn't there some way to fix this?" I looked into her desperate eyes and felt something that might have been pity. "Might have been. There might be," I said quietly. "But it would require you to be completely honest with everyone, your family, the authorities, yourself." "I'll do anything. We'll see about that." Because if I knew Sarah at all, she still had a few more lies left to tell. 3 weeks later, Sarah knocked on my hotel room door at 7 a.m. I'd moved to a nicer place across town while house hunting, but was taking my time finding the right property. No rush when you're suddenly rich beyond your wildest dreams. "I brought coffee," she said, holding up a carrier with 2 cups, "and copies of everything." Everything turned out to be a complete financial confession. Every withdrawal, every forged document, every lie she'd told over the past 2 years. She'd also brought documentation of Mark's gambling debts, which explained where much of the stolen money had actually gone. How delightfully predictable. "The prosecutor wants to meet with you tomorrow," she said, settling into the chair across from my small table. My attorney thinks if I cooperate fully and make restitution, I might avoid prison time. And Mark? Mark is no longer my problem. She held up her left hand, showing the absent wedding ring. I filed for divorce yesterday. Well, that was unexpected. Are you sure about this, Sarah? He's been gambling away our future for years. The business failures, the constant need for money, it was all to cover his addiction. She took a shaky breath. I convinced myself I was protecting my family, but I was really enabling his destruction of it. I studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation or self-pity. What I saw instead was exhaustion and something that might have been genuine remorse or really good acting. With Sarah, it was always hard to tell. The boys don't know yet, she continued. About the divorce or the charges, I wanted to talk to you first. Why? Because they're going to need stability. They're going to need family who can help them through this. She pulled out another document. I want to sign over full custody to you. I nearly dropped my coffee. Even I hadn't seen this level of drama coming. Sarah, that's not necessary. Yes, it is. I'm going to face criminal charges. Even if I avoid prison, I'll have a record. The boys deserve better than that. You're their mother, and I've been a terrible one. You've been paying their school tuition for 3 years. You remember their birthdays when I forget. You've been more of a grandmother to them than I've been a mother. Tears were streaming down her face, but her voice was steady. I don't deserve them, but you do. I reached across the table and took her hand. Sarah, what you've done is terrible, but giving up your children isn't the answer. Then what is? Taking responsibility, making restitution, getting help for the problems that led you here, and fighting every day to become the person your father believed you could be. She looked up at me with red, swollen eyes. Do you think that's possible? After everything I've done? I think your father spent 25 years hoping for exactly this conversation. We sat in silence for a moment. I was actually starting to believe she might be serious about changing. Either that, or she'd become a much better actress. There's something else, she said quietly. Something I need to tell you about Dad. My heart clenched. What about him? The last time I saw him conscious, he asked me to take care of you. He said you'd been the best thing that ever happened to our family, and he was worried about how we'd treat you after he was gone. Fresh tears started falling. I promised him I would. I looked my dying father in the eye and promised to take care of you. Her voice broke. And then I threw you out of your own house. Oh, sweetheart, I've broken every promise I ever made to him. But if you'll let me, I want to try to keep this one. I squeezed her hand. How do you propose to do that? By accepting the consequences of my actions, by trying to make things right, by proving that the daughter he loved is still in here somewhere. That afternoon, I called David to update him on the situation. His reaction was exactly what I'd expected. She wants to give you custody of the boys? His voice was filled with disbelief. She's overwhelmed and scared. I think she believes it's the noble thing to do. What do you think? I think those boys need their mother to fight for them, not abandon them. Even after everything she's done? Especially after everything she's done. They need to see that people can change, that mistakes don't define you forever. David was quiet for a moment. You're a better person than I am, Margaret. I'm not sure I could forgive her. I'm not sure I have yet, but I'm willing to try. What do you need from me? Help me convince her that running away isn't the answer. Those boys are going to need both of us to get through this. The next morning, I accompanied Sarah to her meeting with the prosecutor. We sat in a sterile conference room while she detailed every financial crime she'd committed over the past 2 years. It was like watching someone perform surgery on themselves without anesthesia. Mrs. Mitchell, the prosecutor said when she finished, your cooperation is noted. However, the amount of money involved makes this a felony case. I understand, Sarah replied quietly. Your attorney has proposed a plea agreement, 3 years probation, complete restitution, and 1,000 hours of community service. Sarah looked at me questioningly. I nodded slightly. It was better than prison, which was where she deserved to be. I accept, she said. There's one more condition, the prosecutor added. You'll be required to attend financial counseling and submit to regular auditing of your personal finances for the duration of your probation. Of course. As we left the courthouse, Sarah turned to me. Thank you for being there. This is just the beginning, you know. The hard work starts now. I know. But for the first time in years, I feel like I might actually be able to do it. That evening, we sat down with Tyler and Jake to explain what was happening. The boys, now 15 and 17, were old enough to understand the basics. Your mother made some serious mistakes with money, I told them gently. She's going to work very hard to fix them, but it means some changes for your family. Are you getting divorced? Tyler asked directly. Sarah took a deep breath. Yes, your father and I are getting divorced. Because of the money stuff? Because of a lot of things that have been wrong for a long time. Jake, the older boy, looked at me. Grandma Margaret, are you going to help us? The title still made my heart skip. Always. We're family, no matter what. Good, he said simply. Because Mom's going to need help figuring out how to be normal. Out of the mouths of babes. Sometimes teenagers are the wisest people in the room. The house sold faster than expected. The new owners wanted to close in 2 weeks, which meant Sarah had to find a place for her and the boys immediately. With her credit destroyed and facing criminal charges, options were limited. What a shame. Really broke my heart. I found an apartment, she told me over coffee. This had become our weekly tradition. It's small, but it's clean, and in a good school district. Can you afford it? Her face flushed. That's what I wanted to talk to you about. I need a co-signer. I'd been expecting this. Sarah, I can't enable poor financial decisions. I know, but I can't provide for my children without help, and I can't get help without proving I can provide for my children. It's a catch-22. She had a point, though it was amusing watching her discover how the real world works. Show me your budget. She pulled out a notebook filled with careful calculations. Her handwriting, which had always been chaotic, was now precise and methodical. Desperation really does wonders for organization. I'll be working 2 jobs, bookkeeping for a small business during the day and tutoring math students in the evenings. The boys both have part-time jobs now. We can make rent and basic expenses, but we don't have the security deposits or first month's rent. I studied her numbers. They were realistic, but tight. What about the restitution payments? $50,000 over 3 years. I've worked it into the budget. And Mark's support payments? Mark is bankrupt. There won't be any support payments. She'd done her homework. The budget was honest and achievable, but only barely. It was almost impressive how thoroughly she'd managed to destroy her financial life. If I co-sign this lease, what happens if you relapse into old behaviors? You mean if I start stealing again? I mean if you start making financial decisions based on what you want instead of what you can afford. She was quiet for a moment. Then you kick me out and take custody of the boys. Sarah, no, I'm serious. That should be part of our agreement. If I screw this up, if I prove I can't be trusted, then you take them. They deserve stability more than they deserve their mother's pride. It was a sobering conversation, but also encouraging. The Sarah who'd thrown me out of my house 6 months ago would never have considered putting her children's needs before her own ego. All right, I'll co-sign the lease, but I want monthly financial reports, and I want the boys to know they can come to me if things get difficult. Relief flooded her face. Thank you. I won't let you down. Don't thank me yet. Wait until you've successfully lived within your means for a year. The apartment was indeed small, a 2-bedroom unit with thin walls and outdated appliances, but it was clean, safe, and walking distance from both boys' schools. After living in a McMansion they couldn't afford, this was quite the come-down. It's perfect, Tyler announced as we toured the space. Way better than listening to Dad yell about money all the time. Jake nodded agreement. Plus Grandma Margaret lives close enough to bring dinner when Mom burns stuff. I don't burn everything, Sarah protested. Mom, you burned soup. Soup. I had to laugh. I'll teach you some basic cooking skills. I'd like that, Sarah said quietly. Moving day was a family affair. David and Linda helped load boxes, while Tom supervised the boys carrying furniture. It felt like the first normal family gathering we'd had in years. Well, normal if you ignored the criminal charges and divorce proceedings. This is nice, Linda commented as we unpacked kitchen items. Feels like we're actually helping instead of just watching disaster unfold. Sarah's working hard to change, I replied. She deserves support. She deserves consequences too. But I'm glad you're helping her find a middle ground. That evening, after everyone had gone home, Sarah and I sat on her new couch drinking tea from mismatched mugs. The furniture was second-hand, and the decorations were sparse, but it felt more like a home than the fancy house ever had. I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, she admitted. For you to change your mind and decide I don't deserve help. Why would I do that? Because I spent 25 years taking you for granted. Because I stole money and lied about it. Because I let Mark treat you terribly and never stood up for you. I set down my mug and looked at her seriously. Sarah, do you know why your father fell in love with me? Because you were kind to his children? Because I saw potential in people even when they couldn't see it in themselves. Your father was a broken widower who thought he'd never love again. I saw the man he could become with support and patience. And you see that in me? I see a woman who's made terrible mistakes but is willing to do the hard work of changing. That's more than many people ever manage." She started crying. Again. The woman had become quite the waterworks over the past few months. At this rate, I was going to need to buy stock in tissue companies. "I love you," she whispered. "I should have said that 25 years ago. But I love you. I love you too, kiddo. Always have. Even when I was being horrible? Especially when you were being horrible. That's when love matters most." The boys emerged from their shared bedroom, where they'd been setting up gaming systems and debating furniture placement. "Are you two having a moment?" Jake asked suspiciously. "Yes," I replied. "Deal with it." "Cool. Tyler burned popcorn in the microwave. Can you teach him how to use it properly?" "How do you burn popcorn?" Sarah asked incredulously. "Same way you burn soup, apparently," Tyler replied. "It's a family talent." "That settles it," I announced. "Cooking lessons start tomorrow." As I drove home that night, I reflected on how much had changed in 6 months. Sarah was facing criminal charges and financial ruin, but for the first time in years, she seemed genuinely happy. Her children were speaking to her with respect instead of frustration. Her family was supporting her instead of enabling her. Sometimes losing everything is the only way to find what really matters, even if it takes some people longer than others to figure that out. The phone call came at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday. Sarah's voice was tight with panic, which really isn't the best way to start your morning. "Margaret, I need help. Mark showed up at the apartment last night." I was instantly awake. "What happened?" "He was drunk and angry about the divorce papers. He started yelling about how this was all your fault, how you'd poisoned me against him. Because of course it was my fault. Everything always is, apparently. Are you and the boys okay?" "We're fine." "He didn't hurt anyone, but he scared the neighbors. The police came and arrested him for violating the restraining order." Mark had been served with a restraining order the previous week after showing up at Sarah's workplace demanding money. Apparently, he wasn't taking the boundaries seriously. What a shock. "Where are you now?" "Still at the apartment. The police said it was safe, but the boys are rattled. Pack some bags. You're staying with me until this gets sorted out." "Margaret, I can't impose." "You're not imposing. You're accepting help from family." An hour later, Sarah and the boys were settled in my townhouse. I'd only been living there for a month, but it already felt more like home than the house I'd shared with Robert. Amazing how much more relaxing life becomes when people aren't constantly trying to steal from you. "This place is nice," Tyler observed, examining my modern kitchen appliances. "Everything actually works. And there's no holes in the walls," Jake added, referencing their father's tendency toward destructive outbursts. Sarah looked embarrassed. "The boys are still adjusting to how normal families live." "Normal is overrated," I replied, "but safe is non-negotiable." Over breakfast, we discussed the situation with Mark. His gambling debts had apparently worsened since the separation, and he was becoming increasingly desperate for money. Desperation makes people dangerous and stupid. "He keeps saying the boys' trust fund money belongs to him," Sarah explained. "He can't understand that it's gone." "Does he know about the criminal charges?" "He knows, but he thinks it's all a misunderstanding. He told the police that you manipulated me into confessing to things I didn't do." I nearly choked on my coffee. The audacity was breathtaking. "Excuse me?" "Mark's version of reality has become flexible. He's convinced that you're the villain in this story." "Well, at least he's consistent in his delusions." The boys were listening to this conversation with expressions of disgust that would have been funny under different circumstances. "Dad's been acting crazy for months," Jake said bluntly. "Even before you threw him out, Mom. He'd stay up all night gambling online, then sleep all day instead of working." "We're glad you divorced him," Tyler added. "He was making everyone miserable." It was sobering to hear 15 and 17-year-olds speak so matter-of-factly about their father's dysfunction, but at least they were old enough to recognize toxic behavior when they saw it. That afternoon, Sarah's attorney called with an update on Mark's arrest. "He's being held overnight," she explained to Sarah over the phone, "but he'll likely be released tomorrow with additional conditions on the restraining order." "What kind of conditions?" "No contact with you or the children, no approaching your residence or workplace, and mandatory attendance at Gamblers Anonymous meetings." Sarah hung up, looking worried. "He's not going to follow those conditions. Mark doesn't think rules apply to him." She was right to be concerned. That evening, as we were finishing dinner, Mark called her cell phone 17 times in a row. When Sarah finally answered to tell him to stop, his voice was loud enough for all of us to hear. "You think you're so smart, hiding behind that old witch, but I know where you really are." I took the phone from Sarah's trembling hands. Time to remind him who he was dealing with. "Mark, this is Margaret." "You! This is all your fault. You destroyed my family. Your gambling addiction destroyed your family. Sarah and the boys are safe, and they're going to stay that way. I have rights. Those are my children. Those children have the right to live without fear, something they haven't had in years. I hung up and immediately called the police to report the violation of the restraining order. He'll be arrested again within the hour, the officer assured me. This time, bail will be set higher. How long can this continue? Until he gets help or until he commits a more serious crime that lands him in prison long term? Not exactly reassuring, but at least he'd be someone else's problem for a while. That night, as Sarah tucked the boys into the guest beds, I could hear her talking quietly with them about safety plans and emergency procedures. It broke my heart that children should need such conversations about their own father. Grandma Margaret? Tyler appeared in my kitchen doorway in his pajamas. What's up, kiddo? Is Dad going to keep trying to hurt us? I knelt down to his eye level. I don't know what your father is going to do, but I know that your mother and I are going to do everything possible to keep you safe. Good, because Mom's been happier in the past few months than she's been in years. Dad was always making her cry, out of the mouths of babes. Indeed. Tyler, do you understand why your parents got divorced? Because Dad's sick in his head and won't get help, and because Mom finally got smart enough to stop letting him hurt us. 15 years old, and he understood family dysfunction better than most adults. Your mother loves you very much. She made some bad choices, but she's working hard to do better. I know. She's different now. Like, she actually listens when we talk instead of always worrying about Dad's next meltdown. How do you feel about that? It's weird, but good. Like maybe we can be normal people now. The next morning brought news that Mark had been arrested again for violating the restraining order. This time, the judge set bail at $50,000, money he didn't have. He'll probably be in jail for at least a week, Sarah's attorney explained. That should give us time to file for an emergency custody order. What does that mean? Sarah asked. It means we ask the court to grant you temporary full custody based on his pattern of threatening behavior. If approved, he'd need supervised visitation only. Sarah looked at me questioningly. I nodded encouragingly. Do it, she said firmly. My children's safety comes first. As we left the attorney's office, Sarah seemed more confident than I'd seen her in months. Thank you, she said as we walked to the car. For protecting us, for giving us a safe place to stay, for helping me find the courage to do what's right. You're doing the hard work, kiddo. I'm just providing backup. Still, I don't know how I would have gotten through this without you. That evening, the boys helped me cook dinner while Sarah worked on her tutoring assignments at the kitchen table. For the first time in years, the Peterson family felt like an actual family. It only took a theft investigation, criminal charges, and a restraining order to get us here. Tyler was carefully chopping vegetables while Jake stirred pasta sauce, both of them chattering about school and friends and normal teenage concerns instead of adult problems. This is nice, Sarah observed, looking up from her papers. Peaceful. Weird how much easier life gets when you're not constantly managing crisis, I replied. Yeah, who knew that making good choices leads to good outcomes? Crazy concept, Jake deadpanned. Maybe you should write a book about it. How not to ruin your life. A guide by someone who definitely ruined her life, Tyler suggested. Sarah laughed, actually laughed, for the first time in months. Progress. Slow, messy, but undeniable progress. 4 months later, Sarah's probation officer was impressed enough to recommend early termination of some requirements. Sarah had made every restitution payment on time, completed her community service hours ahead of schedule, and maintained steady employment at 2 jobs. Apparently, the threat of prison really motivates some people. I'm proud of you, I told her, as we left the courthouse after her progress hearing. It feels weird, being proud of doing basic adult things. Basic adult things are harder than people think, especially when you're rebuilding your entire life from scratch. We stopped for coffee at our usual place, the same cafe where she'd first apologized to me months earlier. The waitress knew our order by now and brought it without being asked. Amazing how quickly you can establish new routines when your old ones involved felony theft. I have news, Sarah said, stirring sugar into her coffee. Good news. I'm listening. The accounting firm where I work part-time offered me a full-time position, with benefits. This was huge. Sarah had been working as a bookkeeper for a small business 3 days a week while tutoring high school students in the evenings. A full-time position would mean stability and the ability to quit the evening job. That's wonderful. When do you start? Next month. And Margaret, they know about my record. I told them everything during the interview process, and they hired me anyway. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. Your father would be so proud. Do you really think so? I know so. He always believed in second chances and honest work. There's something else. She pulled out an envelope. Jake got accepted to State University with a partial scholarship. My heart swelled with pride. Jake had worked incredibly hard to bring his grades up after his parents' separation. Between his part-time job and intensive studying, he'd transformed himself from a struggling student to a strong college candidate. He'll still need help with expenses, Sarah continued, but between the scholarship, his savings, and what I can contribute, and what's left in the trust fund, I added. Actually, that's what I wanted to discuss with you. I've been making extra payments toward the restitution, and I've paid back about 60% of what I took, but I want to restore the boys' trust funds completely before Jake starts college. Sarah, that would take every penny you have saved. I know. But those accounts were never mine to touch. The boys deserve to have their grandfather's gift intact. How do you propose to pay for living expenses while making such large payments? She took a deep breath. I want to sell my mother's jewelry. This was significant. Sarah had treasured her mother's jewelry collection since she was 16, often talking about passing it down to future daughters-in-law. It was her most valuable possession and her strongest connection to her mother's memory. Are you sure about this? Mom would want her grandsons to have every opportunity for success. The jewelry is beautiful, but it's just stuff. Their education matters more. What about keeping some pieces for sentimental value? I thought about that. I want to keep her wedding ring and maybe one necklace. The rest can go to benefit the boys. That afternoon, we went to a reputable jewelry appraiser downtown. The collection was worth more than I'd expected, nearly $40,000. Apparently, Sarah's mother had excellent taste in both jewelry and men. This would completely restore the trust funds, the appraiser explained, with some left over for college expenses. Sarah signed the consignment papers without hesitation. Your mother would be proud of this choice, I told her, as we walked back to the car. You think so? I know so. She raised a daughter who finally learned to put family first. That evening, we gathered the boys to share the news about Jake's college acceptance and the trust fund restoration. Wait, Tyler said, processing the information. You're selling Grandma's jewelry to pay back money you stole from us? Sarah winced at the blunt description, but nodded. Yes, he paused, searching for words. That's actually pretty cool, Mom. Jake was staring at his acceptance letter with tears in his eyes. I can't believe this is real. Last year I thought I'd be lucky to graduate high school. Last year was a different life, Sarah replied. This year, we make better choices. Speaking of better choices, I interjected, I have an announcement of my own. All three of them looked at me expectantly. I've decided to establish a scholarship fund at the high school, the Robert Peterson Memorial Scholarship for students who've overcome family challenges. Like what kind of challenges? Tyler asked. Like having parents who made serious mistakes but worked to fix them. Like watching a family fall apart and then rebuild itself. Like learning that people can change if they're willing to do the work. Sarah started crying again. Happy tears this time. The emotional range on this woman was remarkable. Dad would love that, Jake said quietly. He would, and I think he'd love seeing how hard you've all worked to become the family he always hoped you'd be. A week later, we held a celebration dinner at Linda's house for Jake's college acceptance. The entire Peterson family gathered to toast his achievement and Sarah's progress. A year ago, I wasn't sure our family would survive, David said, raising his glass. Tonight, I'm proud of every single person at this table. To second chances, Linda added. To honest work and hard choices, Tom chimed in. To family, Sarah said simply. To family, we all echoed. As the evening wound down, David pulled me aside. Margaret, I owe you an apology I've never properly given. You don't owe me anything, David. Yes, I do. When Sarah was at her worst, when she was stealing money and lying about it, I was ready to write her off completely. You're the one who insisted she could change. She did the changing herself, but you gave her the chance. And more importantly, you gave her consequences with love instead of consequences with punishment. That made all the difference. Your father taught me that people deserve opportunities to become their best selves. Well, it worked. Look at her now, working 2 jobs, living within her means, putting her children first. She's become the daughter Dad always believed she could be. That night, as I helped Sarah load leftovers into containers for the boys, she asked me a question that had clearly been on her mind. Margaret, what would have happened if I hadn't changed? If I'd kept lying and stealing and blaming everyone else? I would have followed through on pressing charges. You would have gone to prison, lost custody of the boys, and probably never rebuilt your relationship with the family. And you would have been okay with that? I considered the question carefully. I would have been heartbroken, but yes, Sometimes love means letting people face the full consequences of their choices. I'm glad I chose differently. Me too, kiddo, me too. 1 year after the will reading, I stood in the cemetery with Sarah and the boys, placing fresh flowers on Robert's grave. This had become our monthly tradition, updating him on family news and milestones. It was also the one place where Sarah couldn't burn anything or make questionable financial decisions, so it felt appropriately safe. "Hey, Dad," Sarah said, kneeling by the headstone. "Jake starts college next month. He's majoring in business, just like you wanted." She paused, as if listening for a response. "And Tyler made honor roll for the 3rd quarter in a row. Margaret's been helping him with calculus. Turns out I'm terrible at math beyond basic addition." Tyler snorted. "You're terrible at basic addition too, Mom." "Hush, I'm having a moment with your grandfather." I stepped forward to place my flowers. "Hello, sweetheart. I think you'd be amazed by your daughter. She's become exactly the woman you always knew she could be." "Are you happy with how things turned out?" Sarah asked quietly. It was a question she'd been asking more frequently lately, as if she needed constant reassurance that redemption was real and lasting. "I'm happy with the work you've done," I replied. "Your happiness is your own responsibility now." That's a very therapist thing to say. I've been reading self-help books. Sue me. The boys wandered off to explore other sections of the cemetery, giving us privacy for deeper conversation. They'd developed an impressive ability to sense when the adults needed to talk about feelings and emotions. "Margaret, can I ask you something personal?" "Always." "Do you ever regret not remarrying after Dad died?" "You're only 55. You could still have a completely different life." I considered the question while watching Tyler and Jake examine an elaborate Victorian monument. "I loved your father deeply, but I'm not opposed to love in general. If the right person came along, but right now, I'm exactly where I want to be. Watching you rebuild your life, helping the boys navigate college and careers, building relationships with the family I always hoped to be part of. This feels like the life I was meant to have, even though it took 25 years to get here, especially because it took 25 years. Easy victories don't teach you anything." Sarah was quiet for a moment, processing this. "I used to think Dad married beneath himself when he chose you, a nurse instead of someone from his social class. And now I think he married someone who understood that real worth comes from character, not circumstances." We sat on the bench near Robert's grave, watching the boys attempt to read weathered inscriptions on century-old headstones. "Sarah, do you remember the last conversation you had with your father? When he asked me to take care of you. Do you feel like you've kept that promise?" She was quiet for a long time, tears slowly forming in her eyes. "I'm trying to. Every day, I'm trying to become someone who deserves the second chance you gave me. You don't have to earn the second chance. It was freely given. What you're earning now is your own self-respect." Same thing, isn't it? Not at all. Self-respect is harder to achieve and more valuable once you have it. That evening, back at Sarah's apartment, we were preparing dinner when she brought up a topic that had been weighing on her mind. "The scholarship fund is doing well," she said, chopping vegetables with the knife skills I'd taught her months earlier. $40,000 raised so far, I agreed. "That's enough for 4 students next year. I want to apply to be on the selection committee." This surprised me. "Are you sure? It would mean disclosing your own background to potential applicants." "I think that's exactly why I should do it. Who better to recognize genuine change than someone who's lived through it?" She had a point. Sarah's journey from entitled embezzler to responsible single mother gave her unique insight into personal transformation, though I wasn't sure the world was ready for her particular brand of wisdom. "What would you say to students who are applying? That mistakes don't define you, but how you respond to them does. That rebuilding trust takes time and consistency. That the work is hard, but worth it. And if they ask about your criminal record, I'll tell them the truth. That I stole money from my own children, lied about it for years, and nearly destroyed my family through selfishness and poor choices. That's pretty harsh. It's honest. And then I'll tell them how I've spent the past year making amends, rebuilding relationships, and learning to live with integrity. You think that will inspire them? I think it will show them that redemption is possible if you're willing to do the work." The boys emerged from their homework sessions in time to help set the table. "What are you two talking about so seriously?" Jake asked. "Whether I should volunteer to help select scholarship recipients," Sarah explained. "That's a great idea, Mom," Tyler said immediately. "You'd be good at spotting kids who are serious about changing their lives." "You think so?" "Definitely. Plus, you could tell them about all your spectacular failures and how you fixed them." Sarah laughed. "Thanks for the vote of confidence, kiddo." "Mom," Jake said thoughtfully, Remember when you used to cry all the time and we never knew why? I remember. I'm glad you don't do that anymore. This is way better. What's way better? Having a mom who's proud of herself instead of ashamed all the time. The simplicity and accuracy of his observation was stunning. Sometimes, 17-year-olds see things more clearly than adults ever do. After dinner, as Sarah reviewed scholarship applications for the selection committee, I realized something important. She was no longer seeking redemption or approval from others. She was building a life based on her own values and goals. The transformation was complete. Now came the real test, maintaining it over time. 2 years after the will reading, I received an unexpected phone call from Mark. He'd been living in another state since the divorce, supposedly working on his gambling addiction and trying to rebuild his life. Or more likely, he'd run out of people to borrow money from and was expanding his search radius. Margaret, I need to talk to you about seeing the boys. You need to talk to Sarah about that. I'm not their guardian. Sarah won't take my calls. Have you considered that there might be a reason for that? There was a long pause. I know I messed up. I'm trying to make things right. Mark, what do you want from me? I want you to convince Sarah to let me see my sons. I've been clean from gambling for 8 months. I have a steady job. I'm going to therapy. And you think that entitles you to access to children you terrorized? They're my children too. I took a deep breath and tried to channel the patience Robert always showed when dealing with difficult people. Though to be fair, Robert never had to deal with anyone quite this delusional. Mark, the last time you saw those boys, you were drunk and violating a restraining order. The time before that, you were demanding money and threatening their mother. Why should anyone trust you now? Because I've changed. So has Sarah. The difference is, she's been proving it through consistent actions for 2 years. You've been absent. I had to get my life together first. Fair enough. But getting your life together doesn't automatically restore relationships you damaged. That requires trust building, and trust building takes time. He was quiet for a moment. Will you at least ask Sarah if she'd be willing to talk to me? I'll mention that you called. What she does with that information is up to her. That evening, I brought up Mark's call while Sarah and I were reviewing her monthly budget, a practice we'd maintained even though she no longer needed oversight. Old habits die hard, especially when those habits involve preventing financial catastrophe. He wants to see the boys, I told her. Sarah's expression tightened. What do you think? I think it's not my decision to make, but what do you think I should do? I considered this carefully. I think you should ask Tyler and Jake what they want. They're old enough to have opinions about their father. And if they want to see him, then you figure out a safe way to make that happen. Supervised visits, public places, clear boundaries. And if they don't want to see him, then you respect their choice and protect their right to feel safe. Sarah was quiet for a long time, staring at her budget spreadsheet like it held the answers to life's greatest mysteries. 2 years ago, I would have said yes immediately because I felt guilty about the divorce. Or I would have said no immediately because I was angry about his behavior. And now I want to make the decision based on what's actually best for my children, not what makes me feel better about myself. That evening, Sarah sat down with Tyler and Jake to discuss their father's request. I stayed in the kitchen, giving them privacy, but remaining close enough to provide support if needed. Dad wants to see us, I heard Sarah explain. He says he's been working on his problems and wants to rebuild our relationship. What kind of problems? Tyler asked skeptically. The gambling addiction? The anger issues, the financial irresponsibility. Has he paid back any of the money he cost us? Jake asked bluntly. Smart kid. Always go straight to the money question. No. Has he apologized for scaring us? Not to you directly, no. There was a long pause. I don't want to see him, Tyler said firmly. Maybe someday, but not now. Jake? Sarah asked. Same. He made our lives miserable for years. 8 months of therapy doesn't erase that. Are you sure? He is your father. So, that doesn't give him the right to hurt us and then demand forgiveness when it's convenient for him. I was proud of both boys for their clarity and self-advocacy. They'd learned not to set themselves on fire to keep other people warm. Sarah called Mark back that evening to relay the boys' decision. They're not ready, she told him, and I'm not going to force them. I could hear Mark's raised voice through the phone, but couldn't make out specific words, probably for the best. Mark, you lost the right to make demands when you chose gambling over your family, Sarah said calmly. If you want a relationship with your sons, you need to earn it the same way I earned their forgiveness, through consistent, trustworthy behavior over time. More raised voice from Mark. No, I'm not turning them against you. They formed their own opinions based on your actions. She hung up and turned to me with a tired expression. How did I stay married to someone who thinks responsibility is optional? You were different then too. You both were. Do you think I'm being too hard on him? I think you're protecting your children. Which is exactly what a good mother does. 3 months later, Mark called again. This time, he'd completed a year of gambling addiction treatment and wanted to send letters to the boys. Letters might be okay, Sarah mused after we discussed the request. It's less invasive than phone calls or visits. What would the boundaries be? No requests for money? No guilt trips about the divorce? No promises he might not keep? Just honest communication about his recovery and his feelings. She presented the idea to Tyler and Jake, who agreed to try receiving letters with the understanding that they didn't have to respond if they didn't want to. The first letter arrived a week later. I was present when the boys read it, ready to provide emotional support if needed, or witness protection, depending on how badly Mark had screwed it up. Mark's letter was surprisingly appropriate. He acknowledged his past behavior, took responsibility for the family's difficulties, and shared details about his recovery program without making demands or promises about the future. This is actually not terrible, Jake admitted after reading it twice. He didn't blame Mom for anything, Tyler observed. That's different. Are you going to write back? Sarah asked. Maybe. Let me think about it. That evening, Tyler did write a brief response. 2 paragraphs explaining that he was doing well in school and appreciated his father's honesty about past problems. Jake chose not to respond, but he didn't throw the letter away either. Progress, Sarah said simply. Slow progress is still progress, I agreed. By the end of the year, the boys were exchanging occasional letters with their father and had agreed to a supervised phone call on Christmas Day. It wasn't reconciliation, but it was communication, which was more than anyone had expected. I'm proud of how you handled this, I told Sarah as we wrapped Christmas presents for the boys. I almost screwed it up so many times. I wanted to either punish Mark by keeping the boys away from him or guilt them into forgiving him faster. But you didn't do either of those things, because you taught me that good parenting means supporting your children's emotional needs, not managing your own guilt and anger through your children. Where did you learn that? Therapy. Turns out there are books about how to be a functional human being. Who knew? I laughed. Sarah's sense of humor about her own recovery process had become one of my favorite things about her transformation. Your father would be so proud of the mother you've become. I hope so. I'm finally proud of myself, which is a start. Christmas morning brought another milestone. Jake announced he was changing his major from business to social work. I want to help families like ours, he explained. Families that are struggling but still have hope. That's a beautiful goal, I told him. I learned from watching you and Mom that sometimes the best help comes from people who've been through similar struggles. And sometimes, Tyler added, the best way to heal your own life is to help other people heal theirs. Out of the mouths of babes, indeed. Sometimes the next generation really does turn out better than the one before it. 5 years after Robert's death, I stood in the backyard of Sarah's new house, a modest 3-bedroom she'd purchased after being promoted to senior accountant at her firm. The entire Peterson family was gathered for the annual Robert Peterson Memorial Scholarship Barbecue, an event that had grown from a simple family dinner to a community celebration. Who knew that starting with embezzlement charges could lead to such a heartwarming tradition? Grandma Margaret, a small voice called out. I turned to see Emma, David's 4-year-old granddaughter, running toward me with a dandelion clutched in her tiny fist. For you, she announced, presenting the wilted flower with the solemnity of a state ceremony. It's beautiful, sweetheart. Thank you. Emma beamed and ran off to find more flowers to pick, leaving me with a handful of weeds and a heart full of joy. Children have such a talent for finding beauty in the most unlikely places. She adores you, Linda observed, joining me at the picnic table where I was arranging Emma's botanical gifts in a plastic cup. The feeling is mutual. It's amazing how much this family has grown and changed, Linda continued, gesturing toward the crowd gathered in Sarah's yard. 5 years ago, I wasn't sure we'd ever speak to each other again. I followed her gaze across the gathering, Sarah laughing with Tom's wife while they tended the grill, Tyler and Jake playing cornhole with their cousins, David pushing Emma on the swing set he'd installed that morning. Your brother would be amazed, I said. He'd be proud of all of us, but especially of you. Me? You held this family together when we were falling apart. You gave Sarah consequences when she needed them and support when she was ready to change. You turned an inheritance dispute into a story about redemption. Sarah did the hard work of changing, but you made it possible. There's a difference. Before I could respond, Sarah approached with a young woman I didn't recognize. Margaret, I want you to meet Jessica Torres. She's our first scholarship recipient to graduate college. Jessica was a petite young woman with serious eyes and a firm handshake. Mrs. Peterson, I can't thank you enough for the scholarship program. It literally changed my life. Tell me about yourself, I said, genuinely curious. I was 17 when my mom was arrested for drug possession. My dad had been gone for years, and I was basically raising my 2 younger brothers alone. I thought I'd have to drop out of high school to work full-time. What changed? Sarah found me crying in the guidance counselor's office and told me about the scholarship program. She also told me about her own story, how she'd made terrible mistakes but found a way to rebuild her life. I glanced at Sarah, who was listening with quiet pride. Sarah convinced me to finish high school and apply for college. The scholarship covered tuition, and she helped me find a part-time job that worked with my class schedule. What did you study? Social work, just like Jake. I want to help other kids who are dealing with family crisis. And your brothers? They're both in high school now, both honor students. They want to apply for Peterson scholarships when they graduate. Jessica's story was exactly what Robert had hoped for when I established the fund in his memory. Young people overcoming difficult circumstances through education and support. What's next for you? I asked. I start graduate school in the fall, and I'll be doing my internship with the County Family Services Department. Sarah offered to be my practicum supervisor. I looked at Sarah in surprise. You didn't mention you were supervising students. It's new. The university needed placement sites for students interested in financial counseling and family crisis intervention. Turns out my background makes me qualified to help. Your criminal background? My recovery background. There's a difference. Later that evening, after the guests had gone home and we'd finished cleaning up, Sarah and I sat on her back porch watching the sunset. 5 years ago, I never could have imagined sitting peacefully with the woman who'd thrown me out of my own home. 5 years, she said quietly. 5 years, I agreed. Do you ever think about what would have happened if I hadn't changed? If I'd kept lying and stealing and blaming everyone else? Sometimes, but I try not to dwell on alternate histories. I think about it all the time, how different everything would be if you just had me arrested and walked away. But you did change, and I didn't walk away. That's the history that matters. I used to think redemption was about earning forgiveness from other people. Now I know it's about becoming someone you can live with. I squeezed her hand. Your father would be so proud of who you've become. I hope so. I'm finally proud of myself. A comfortable silence settled between us as we watched fireflies begin to dance in the gathering dusk. There's something magical about summer evenings when you're surrounded by people you love, even if it took criminal charges to get everyone there. Margaret, can I ask you something I've been wondering about for months? Of course. Do you ever feel like Dad set this whole thing up? Like he knew exactly what would happen when he changed his will? I considered the question. Robert had been a chess player, always thinking several moves ahead. It wouldn't surprise me if he'd orchestrated this entire drama from beyond the grave. I think your father knew his family well enough to predict how people would react to his decisions. You think he planned for me to steal the money and get caught? I think he planned for consequences to have meaning. Whether you learned from them or not was up to you. That's very zen of him. Your father was a wise man who loved his children enough to let them face the results of their choices. Sarah was quiet for a moment, processing this. I'm glad he did. Even though it was the hardest thing I've ever been through, I'm glad it happened. Why? Because now I know who I really am when everything is stripped away, and I like that person. As the stars began to appear overhead, I reflected on the journey that had brought us here. 5 years ago, I'd been a widow thrown out of her own home by ungrateful stepchildren. Tonight, I was surrounded by family who valued and respected me, watching those same stepchildren raise their own children with love and integrity. Sarah, yeah, thank you. For what? For becoming the daughter your father always knew you could be. For giving me the family I always hoped to have. For proving that people can change if they're willing to do the work. She leaned over and hugged me tight. Thank you for not giving up on me when I'd given up on myself. I love you, kiddo. I love you too, Mom. Mom. After 27 years, she finally called me Mom. Robert's plan had worked perfectly. The old schemer had gotten exactly what he wanted. A family that actually acted like family. A wife who was respected and loved, and children who'd learned that character matters more than entitlement. It only took embezzlement charges, criminal prosecution, and 5 years of hard work to get us here. But it was worth every minute. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.